Hello and welcome to another episode of Timesport on the Beat with me, Fadli. So today, our football specialist Rajan isn't here because he's got something to do. But we have another very special guest today, Sayf Ismail, who is very well known in the football circles. And in case you're not familiar with him, he's a former head of marketing at FAM, also adjunct professor at Universiti Malaya, and a corporate consultant specializing in ESG.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Saif, maybe you can just introduce yourself a bit for the benefit of the audience, maybe not too familiar.
Okay. So my name's Sayf. Like you mentioned, I'm the former head of marketing and social responsibility at FAM, but it's quite a while ago, 2014 to 2017. And after I left, I've been in the football space in many different roles, but also I've been in the corporate space as well, doing different things as well. But my passion is Malaysian football, and I've been what I would say a backbencher in terms of trying to move the sport forward, right?
All right. Okay, so Saif, this week is a big week for Malaysian football. We have the FA of Malaysia elections coming up in a few days. And so that's part of the reason we brought you in as a guest, because we want your insight into the upcoming elections and into Malaysian football in general. But more interestingly, I think recently news came out that you were also intending to run for president. Maybe you can share a bit about your journey there.
Okay. So actually, the whole conversation started as a joke, right? It was at a point where the current president, Tan Sri Hamidin, mentioned that he was not going to contest, and the heir apparent was Datuk Johari Ayub, and nobody else contested. So it was at that point where I put it was over X. Actually, people were talking, and I said, no, this election cannot be uncontested. Somebody has to contest. There needs to be exchange of ideas. There needs to be debate around this, right? So then some people on X said, why don't you contest? And I said, okay, I'll do it. So it kind of started as a joke, and it kind of built momentum, and then the papers came in, and it became a big, I would say, kind of movement. And I did it because I wanted to create conversation around what is required in football management, in football administration in Malaysia. Because if not, and what we've seen up to now is that there's really hasn't been any talk of what this new leadership is going to do, right? It's just been profiles of people saying, okay, I am Datuk sekian-sekian, and I want to contest. But we haven't seen manifestos, we haven't seen ideas, or we haven't seen any real talk about what are the next steps, right? So that was my intention to run, to open up the conversation.
All right. So maybe you can just explain a bit how to get nominated for president. I mean, being elected to president is one thing, but getting that first hurdle to get nominated itself is a huge step.
Yes. So so there's a nomination step and then an election step, right? So nomination for the Football Association of Malaysia president seat, you need to get 6 nominations from 20 available affiliates.
Okay.
But this year it was 6 from 20 minus 2 because 2 affiliates have already been suspended, which is Perlis and Kelantan, and that was the first time an affiliate has been suspended. Quite untimely, just before election, right? So we don't know. But so I had to secure 6 out of 18. Whereas if we look at the AFC, Asian Football Confederation statutes, for example, if I wanted to contest as a president there, I only need 3 nominations from 47 members. So the way FAM has kind of structured its statutes does not allow for challenge. Right, 6 out of 18 is 1/3 already just to be nominated. Right, so it is quite impossible for anybody outside the fraternity to actually come in and contest, right? And the reason why I wanted the president's seat was because it is at that seat where you can actually effectively invoke change, right? I don't see, because I've been at FAM, I've been in EXCO meetings as an observer. It's very hard for EXCO members or even deputy presidents and vice presidents to actually make change.
Okay, all right. So, the election, I think, is a bit of an anticlimax because
Yes.
there's no contest for the top 3 spots.
That's right.
So, maybe you can share a bit what were your expectations for this Saturday?
So we already know the top 3 spots, right? And for the vice president, there's 5 nominees out of 4 slots. So one will be omitted lah, basically. And actually, for me, it doesn't matter which one because, like I said, at that the leadership is really, and the power given by the statutes is for the president, right? So for the vice and the excos, yes, they have a voice. But what I've seen in most meetings and what I've heard is that whatever the president says goes. Right. The rest are more what I would say yes men. Right. There have been some members who have been vocal in the past, but usually their voices are drowned out by the majority of what I would say the followership of the president, right? And the fact that there's no contest, it means that there is no I would say strong debate within that group of exco that it will be appointed, right?
Okay, Saif, just want to ask you what do you think that this new set of office bearers for this next term have to do to maybe bring Malaysian forward in the right direction?
Okay, so that's a great question. I think what we need to look at is what is not working with Malaysian football now, right? Especially in what has happened in the past, let's say 2 terms, because it's the 2 terms of the outgoing president now, right? So from what I've seen, the major achievements that has been achieved are only 2, right? One is the rise in rankings of the national team, and that is as a result of playing more games and being more strategic in choosing opponents, right? So it's not that difficult to move up the rankings if you spend the right money and play with the right teams, right? But the second achievement, I think, was qualifying for the Asian Cup, right? By merit. But we also have to remember that it was an expanded format, meaning more slots were available, right? And we got in through there. But our performance at the Asian Cup, we only got 1 point. We lost the first 2 games. And we were overly aesthetic, in my view, by getting a draw in the last game against Korea, right? South Korea. But it is a success in its own way. So these are what I think are the high points. But there are many low points. And I'd like to point towards the national team, even though rankings are better. But in the region, we are not even in the top 4, I would say. And this is reflected in the past AFF Cups. We have not gone into the semi-finals, right? And we have been clearly taken over by the likes of Vietnam, by Thailand, by Indonesia, right? And even in this previous campaign in December, we had a tough time beating Timor-Leste, which is, they came to Bukit Jalil and I was at the game and they actually gave us a good game and a bit of a scare, right? So I think the performance of the national team is left wanting, okay? We are not an established, I would say, force even in the region. Our national teams, the underage national teams in the past, I would say 8 years, haven't achieved much as well, right? The under-23s, the under-20s, under-19s. I don't think we qualified for anything major. So the national teams haven't really been working, I would say. Then if you look at the league side, right? I think in 2014 we had quite a thriving Super League and the Premier League, right? Both of 12 teams, right? A lot of matches being played. Fast forward that to now, we only have 1 Super League with 13 teams. We were supposed to expand that, but that didn't happen. The Premier League is now gone. We have a lot of cases of unpaid salaries, which leads to suspension of teams, right? A lot of pending court cases as well with players. we have lesser teams, right? And I think next year it will actually come to a boil where it's heard that maybe the Super League might not even have, might even have only 8 teams playing, right? Because of the high cost of participation, and this is also because of the, I would say the inability to make the Super League commercially viable, right? There were big amounts of money that was promised with the privatization of the league, right? But that has not come to fruition as well. We don't know what the amount of TV rights, broadcast rights, and commercial is given. Before, this was quite transparent, and FAM itself has been, I would say, laden with a bit of scandal as well, with the surat layangs and the accusations of, office bearers with high salaries, and then so there's a lot of things that has happened in the past 2 terms, I would say, that needs to be fixed. And I would say that we are probably not better off now than we were 10 years ago, right?
All right.
So
okay. I'm just going to go back to the question, how do we fix the Malaysian football again? Okay, maybe you can start off with the league first, because, with so very, very high salaries and a lot of expenses, it's a very different scenario compared to the 80s, when it's much cheaper to run the league, and we had tobacco money at the time.
Yes.
So what can we do?
So I think we need to be brave, right? The leadership needs to be brave in thinking about how to reduce the cost of participation, right? High salaries is not really the league's fault. Okay. This is where clubs who now have professional management need to think about, is it worth paying players a certain amount of money for the quality that you get? And we also have to remember that there is ample quality out there, right? Looking for football talent, there's more supply than there is demand. Right. In the league, there are only, let's say, 13 teams times 30 players. So you're about only, 300 plus slots for you to fill. There's thousands of players who want to play. Yeah. Right. Not just from Malaysia. Imports also, there's thousands. So why are we overpaying on salaries? The clubs need to address this. But the league itself has to be more competitive. Right. We have 1 or 2 very strong teams, and it's not their fault that they are doing well. It's the rest that have to compete, right? But on top of that, there are new challenges in the league as well. Back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, right? You were competing against not many other forms of alternate entertainment, right? But now the question is: do I go to a football game, or do I stay home and watch Netflix? Right? Do I bring my family to watch a football match, or do I go to a mall and have dinner at at a fancy restaurant or a normal restaurant, right? So these are all the questions that the league has not answered, right? And especially on the fan experience, right? And this is why we see declining stadium attendances, right? Which is actually the base of commercial success, right? I think a few weeks ago there was, it went a bit viral that there were some matches below 1,000 people attending, right? And this is embarrassing given the amount of money that is being paid to the players, right? And the amount of money invested by sponsors as well, right? So the league really has to address this and see how it can make the league more exciting, and the fan experience to go to the stadiums better, right? And you cannot just follow a model of how other people do it. We are unique, right? And I've always said this, that in Malaysia we are very much influenced by the Premier League, the English Premier League, right? But so we say, oh, if they are doing this, why can't we do that, right? But in the Premier League, for example, the whole culture of football spectatorship is built around alcohol. Right? It's a drinking day, right? So for them, match at 3:00 on a Sunday, right, starts at noon in the pub. right? And they'll go and they'll have the they will have their pre-drinks, then they will go to the match and shout and chant and do all that, and then win or lose, they'll come back and be happy because it's an experience. Right. It's not just about the game. So I don't think that we have managed to create that in the Malaysian context, right? So if it takes serving nasi lemak on a table in front of people, if that's what it takes to get crowds to come, then that might be it. But I think the league really needs to start thinking about how to get people back into the stadiums, right? How to make that fan experience better. And it's a tough job because, like I said, now there's a lot of alternate options, right? So so that's one. And I think the second, like I said, being more competitive, right? And lowering the cost of participation for teams. Right? We've seen that more and more teams cannot afford to play in the Super League, right? More and more teams are going with unpaid salaries. We have now 6-7 months. Some teams, right? I think KDN yesterday came out the newspapers as well, right? So this is a financial kind of economic model that the league has to address as well, right? How do you make it sustainable? The league sustainable for teams that want to join, right? So it cannot be the case that if you have a rich benefactor or a wealthy state government who's backing you, only then you can participate, because it's not sustainable. And we've seen this with teams, fly-by-night teams. They come 1 or 2 seasons, 3 seasons, but to hilang, right? And they disappear. So again, this financial model of how the league operates needs to be addressed, which is also tied up with the club licensing system, because the club licensing system actually dictates the rules of how a club operates in the league, right? And all the kind of extra costs that it has to spend in order to participate. So a lot of thought has to be put into this. I think, and it has to be done in the Malaysian context, right?
Besides lowering the salary, how else can we make it cheaper for the teams?
Cost of participation. So, for example, this move to professionalism, right, is, in my view, too fast, right? So the professionalism means that the salaries automatically go and get higher. But not only that, the requirements, right? The requirements are actually quite high. So if I'm a new team, I need to have a stadium of a certain standard.
I see.
Right. I need to have the best, I think 2 or 3 ambulances on standby now, right? I need the field to be of certain standard. I need the dressing rooms to be. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do this, but if it becomes a burden to the team, right? Maybe we have not collectively reached that standard yet, right? So you might have to have exceptions, right? Just to allow people to participate. Because what I see now is the league is actually, when teams cannot comply, when they cannot, they fine them. So it's almost trouble on trouble, right? Okay, I've put the requirements high, and when you can't meet the requirements, I fine you lagi. Then after I fine you, then I will suspend you. And we've seen this happen, right? So it's a cycle, a kind of like vicious cycle that brings things down. So I think from a systemic point of view, the league really needs to look at how to solve these problems, bringing the cost down, right? Getting fans back on in, because when the fans come back, the commercial value increases, right? Means more sponsors would want to come in, and that money from sponsorship and from broadcast can be given back to the teams, right? When we first went professional, I think there was something they were saying about 3 million a year for every team.
Broadcasting
rights, right? But that never happened, to my knowledge, right? And even now, we don't know. But from what I hear, it's not even 1 million or 1.5. It's not even half of that, right? So there's, again, a lot of hard thinking needs to be done by the league, right? And not just the league, because FAM says, we've privatized, the league has to think about this. FAM is still the governing body. So you cannot just, wash your hands clean and say, okay, now it's with the league, they have to do it, right? I think there has to be a collaborative effort between FAM, between the league, between the affiliates, all the clubs, right, to really sit down together and think, how do we restructure this for success, so that everybody is set up for success and for everybody to win, right?
Right. Sayf, being a marketing specialist yourself, I just wanted to go back to the issue of eyeballs being spread more thinly across so many interests at the moment.
That's right.
You know, even in tennis, for example, it used to be just tennis. Now pickleball is
Yes.
popular, padel is popular. And Formula One a few years ago was in trouble. They lost a lot of viewers and all that. But they turned it around with that Netflix Drive to Survive series.
That's right.
So is there anything like that we can do for the M League?
I think so. So that's a very good example. And even the Premier League, if we look at, because like I always say, we shouldn't use Premier League as a benchmark because they're so far away ahead of us, but we can take lessons from them, right? So I think what I used to say when I was at FAM was that the match is just the start. Okay? What is around the match is what matters. All the hype around the match. So, sometimes you have anticipation of a final match, right? The hype is even better than the actual event, right?
Okay.
Then you go to the match, it's a 0-0, ends up with penalties.
I give you a better example. Mike Tyson versus
Yes.
I can't even remember his name now.
Jake
Paul,
Paul, right? Yeah.
That was a complete letdown, right? But
That's
the build-up was incredible.
That's right. So the marketing engine works, right? Everybody was excited, right? I think in the build up to that, the first 2 weeks or the 2-3 weeks before that, it was, you couldn't escape it. And I think this is the lesson that we need to think about, right? How do you build all the marketing engine and the hype around it, right? Such that even if the product isn't always good every time, but the interest is there, right? And I think Malaysian football really needs to think about that. It's not as simple as putting up a few Facebook posts, right? And whatnot, right? So in terms of marketing, in terms of generating interest, you need to find new angles of storytelling, right? I always say in marketing, people follow people, right? So you have to find human stories about the players, right? On Prime, Amazon Prime, they do a lot of backroom stories,
behind
right,
the scene,
of all the teams, right? So we need to be creative in this sense, right? It's not just managing a league, creating a schedule, making sure all the teams turn up, and hoping that the fans will turn up. So I think the hype is very important. All the engines or all the mechanisms in the hype. And secondly, I think the stadium experience has to be upgraded.
Okay.
Right. So if I have to, park 2 kilometers or 1 kilometer away and then walk with my family, berpeluh pula,
little kids,
right, with little kids, and then it's a hassle to get in, and I get there, and then if I want to pray, the prayer room is a small room, and ambil semayang susah, and all these things, right? And then the food is
Sapa.
you dapat burger stadium,
Put it mildly lah.
burger stadium that's cut in two, right? Why would I go?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yes, I want to support my team, right? But if it's not enjoyable for me, it's not enjoyable for my family, then I won't go, right? And we really need to bring, I think, the family unit into this, right? So we want to make it, okay, when there's a match, I want to bring my family, I want to bring my kids, I want to have them go to the stadium, experience the atmosphere that you cannot buy or you cannot get through watching it on TV. Right. So I think that part is also missing. Yes, and we really need to think along the lines of what works for our people. Right. I mentioned this before, and we've moved kickoffs to 5 o'clock now. Right. When traditionally Malaysian football was always played at night. Right. And the reason is commercial viability, right? Or if we can play, it's cheaper to play in the day, and there's more slots and TV and whatnot, right? But again, if you look at our cultural roots, Malaysians sleep late, right? Betul. We have, especially the Malays, we have dinner late.
Yeah.
Right.
That's correct. Yeah.
Because it's kind of governed with waktu solat ni, right? With time, prayer time. So we have to do Maghrib first and then we can go out. Right. That's why traditionally, I know in the 80s, kickoff was 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right. And it's okay if it finishes at 11 because, right.
Yeah.
So, but we kind of okay, we want to move forward, right? And we can other countries can play, at different times, right? But if you ask me, susah nak sampai maghrib nak pergi stadium, I'll stay at home lah. Right.
But I still think about that 9 o'clock is the prime time.
It is the prime time, right? So I'm not saying that there's not matches, but what I'm trying to say is that we really need to fit into our culture. Right, not just look at outside and say that this is what other people do, it should work with us. No, right. We need to find something that works for our culture, for our people, for our demographics, right? And I think this is where clubs really need to get good marketing officers, right? And really think about how do you make it exciting for people to come to the stadium and have that experience, right?
I think that. That is something that American sports have mastered. They're essentially, especially for fighting like mixed martial art, boxing, it's essentially an entertainment company built around a sports company.
That's right.
I think we still have a long way to go, but it's possible, especially with social media, kan? Behind the scenes footage.
Yes,
like Prime did with the Spurs and all that kind of that would be very interesting, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
I mean, who knows? I mean, it's not that hard to produce now because you can do this off an iPhone, basically, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So I think the cost of production has reduced. It's just a matter of creativity, a matter of allowing new ideas to come, which again, if we bring it back to this election, because there's no contest, it means that there's no new ideas.
Okay.
Right. And this is where I think the main problem is. There might be a lot of people in the lower or around the industry. If you look at the amount of podcasts on football, banyak. There's a lot, right? But this just not really empowered. And at the end of the day, the status quo remains, right? The traditional thinking remains.
So I'm just going to move on to a slightly different topic now. So there's a new national team management setup now, completely revamped with new coaches and also a CEO and head of sports medicine and sports science and all that. What's your opinion on this? This is going to be inherited by the new FAM of the not completely
new president,
the new term, the new president. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see why this came up first. Okay, so I didn't mention just now why we are so desperate for naturalized players is because we don't have the local talent, right? Which means there's a failure in the development side, right? Yeah. We are not producing good enough talent to bring to the national team, but we crave for success, and therefore we look for players who can represent Malaysia who are not originally from Malaysia or fall under this naturalization definition. Okay, it's legal. There's nothing wrong with it. But I do feel that it is a short to mid-term strategy. I do feel it's quite risky as well, right? And a lot of questions around what happens to local talent. Yeah. Right. We hear now that there's about 7 new players who might come in, right? So if I am a player playing in the Super League, right, what are my chances of representing the country, right? Because the quality gap is definitely quite there's a gap there, right? Quite a large gap. So as a short-term measure, we do have aspirations to be in the World Cup, the Asia Cup now. That's the most important thing, right? We've had a taste of it, and we have qualifiers this year, right? And that's why we're rushing for these plays. So I think from a management point of view, I think I invite it. It's very good to get people who are more learned than us, who have more experience to come in and help. But I really feel that it is a short-term solution. The longer-term solution is you need to strengthen the base of Malaysian football. You need to strengthen the grassroots. You need a bigger pool of players. You need more football happening at the ground level, right? And only with that you will get a stronger pool of players, a wider pool of players, a pool of players who have played more competitive matches in their development, and you can produce higher quality players, homegrown, into the team, into the national team. So, short-term measure, I think is okay, but this cannot be the way forward, right? In my view, right, in the long term. And I've been asked this question before, and I thought about it. How do you explain if you saw the Malaysian national team win the Asian Cup, for example, with a group of with a team of naturalized players? How does it feel? So for me, the best way to explain it is it's almost like eating nasi lemak without ikan bilis. Yeah, still nasi lemak, but it doesn't feel right. Right.
Not quite the same.
Not quite the same,
Yeah.
right?
So ultimately it still boils down to grassroots and all the talent coming up through the ranks lah. So, but now with the Division 1 no more.
Yes.
That's another issue there. What do you think about that?
So what the communication from MFL is that the Premier League has become the Piala MFL, I think, right?
Okay.
But again, this Piala MFL, if you look in the teams there, is Selangor 2 lah. It's
Okay.
the 2 team of the
reserve
upstairs
team
team,
of the-
right? There's actually not enough teams in Malaysia, right? If you look at from the Super League, ada 13. Tengok the MFL Cup, then you tengok A1, A2 pun teams from the top is the second or third team from the top, right? And I think the problem is because there is no the cost is too high. Even in the A1 league, right? Recently, I think last 2 months or last month, they were saying that 6 teams have will have disappeared suddenly because they cannot participate. And we've been hearing of stories of unpaid salaries in the amateur league. Right. No, it's okay to be. I'm not saying it's okay. You can understand it in the Super League.
Yeah.
But in amateur league, how can you have unpaid salaries as well, right? So there's something fundamentally wrong here, right? And again, we really need to go back to the drawing board, right? But as I mentioned, the answer is in grassroots, right? The problem that exists now is that there is not enough grassroots movement, right? And the pathway to becoming a player that plays in either the Super League or the MFL League or the A1, A2 is very, very narrow, right? Very narrow and very rigid. So if you are from school, you have to be in one of the state sekolah sukan negeri, right? If you're there, then you might have an opportunity. If you're outside of that, it's quite hard to come in, right? So we need to look at alternate pathways. We need to look at how to get more people who are. I mean, I've always said that there is no there is enough talent in this country, because the question of talent doesn't really arise against the function of a population, because we've seen smaller countries produce high quality talent, right? Uruguay, for example. I always use Uruguay because it's a country of 2 million, but won the first World Cup and has been in almost every World Cup ever since. Right, so you can't use the fact that Malaysia only has 33 million people as an excuse, right? It is really about how much football is being played on the ground, and this is where the real failure of FAM is, in my view. And this is what the new exco and the new president really needs to look into. Because the common denominator for any successful football country is a thriving grassroots scene, a thriving grassroots ecosystem. If you don't have that, it won't work.
Yeah, that's
right.
true.
Problem now, focus is on the elite. Right. You'll be surprised to know that maybe I can't talk about this openly, but the amount of investment that is put in by FAM into grassroots is laughingly small.
Okay.
Okay. right? If you take it as a function of, I would say, ratio, right, between how much is spent on the elite teams versus grassroots, is probably, I would say, maybe 1 out of 8, something like that, or 1 out of 10 maybe.
So very disproportionate.
Very disproportionate, right? So this is from what I've heard, right? And from the numbers in the reports, you can kind of look at this, right? And so the allocation of funds, we are not investing in the grassroots. We're investing in the high elite areas because we want instant success. And also, I think the management cost of FAM is too high as well. And I think the Exco needs to look at this. The governance as well. There have been questions about how come office bearers are achieving or are taking too high a salary when you're not putting it into the grassroots, right? So maybe one person's salary can actually power a whole grassroots league, right? So does it make sense or not? So these things, especially on the governance side, again, FM is very far behind. There are a lot of questions that we would like to ask, but maybe people in the fraternity are not brave enough to ask, right? Especially in terms of transparency, in terms of where does the money that FM gets, where is it spent actually? Right. Yes. More mature national footballing associations are very transparent in their financial dealings. They actually say, okay, we pay our office bearers this much, right? We pay the coaches this much. We pay, right, down to detail. FM is very lump sum in their reports. You can download the reports on in the Congress book, right? So I think in terms of governance, we need to be more transparent so that the people know that the money received by FM, and now we have more of a say because 30 million just came from taxpayers' money, right? It's your money, my money too. So we need to know where is this going, right? Is it going the right places? And I think the last thing I would like to say about FM is you need to understand that as a national body, you are now in this day and age more responsible to a largest group of stakeholders, right? You have an interest, everybody has an interest. The person who goes to the stadium pays 5 ringgit to watch a league game has an interest, right? The kids who are playing in the school leagues have an interest. These are all your stakeholders. It's not just you and your exco and your 20 affiliates anymore, right? You need to start listening to what people are saying, right? I mean, I could talk with you about this and our check could be totally dismissed and they'll be fine. But they have to understand that at the end of the day, football is the number one sport in the country. It affects a lot of us on a deep level. People are passionate about it. And unfortunately, if they are still closed, what happened before, this FAMB issues, right, in the stadium, and recently there was a boycott, that might come again, right? And for me, if people are willing to boycott a national team match, that is an ultimate failure already.
Is that the first time? I never heard of that happening before, the fans boycotting Michigan.
It has happened a few times in history, right? But you have to understand how much discontent there is
for that to happen.
Okay, right? So you can't be sitting in your little circle at Kelana Jaya saying, "Oh, everything's fine and dandy," right? There are a lot of problems that need to be addressed. You must recognize these problems first, right? And my biggest, I would say, fear is that those who are in power and those who will after the election, right, who are nominated into positions are not mindful of this, because through the grapevine, when I have my ears on the ground as well, in Kelana Jaya everything is fine, everything's good. FM is doing a good job, right? And if that's the case, if you do not have awareness of what you're lacking and what your problems are and what your challenges are, we could have this podcast 4 years time, and I'll be saying the same thing, right? And nothing changes as well, and that is unfortunate if that happens, right?
Sayf, is there anything else you'd like to add before we end this session?
Yes, so I think I'd like to kind of advocate for the public, right, to understand their role in pushing football in Malaysia, right. FAM receives funds from a lot of sources, but now one of the biggest sources is taxpayer money, right? And if it wasn't taxpayer money direct from the government, it was still taxpayer money through a GLC before this.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true. Yeah.
So we need to demand more from these leaders, right? We need to question them. We need to demand transparency. We need to demand good governance. We can't just leave them in their little bubble and then just get angry every now and then. This is what's been happening, right? So this is what I'm about, actually. I'm trying to bring a bit of balance. I'm asking questions about, not because I want to bring people down, but because I think we deserve better as a nation. And this is, like I said, the number one sport. It touches us so deeply, right? So what I would advocate for fans is to have a voice, right? On Facebook or on Twitter or X or whatever it is, please ask the right questions, right? To the point where the leaders need to be aware and they need to answer these hard questions. Because if not, like I said, we'll be here the next 4 years, another election, some new datuk will come around, right? And we'll still be here hoping for success, right? So that is what I would advocate for fans. The change starts from us, and we need to demand better from the leadership, whoever it is that wins. We know who wins, right? Whoever comes to power at that group of executive committee, we need to demand more from them, right? So that would be my message to the public, I would say.
All right, thank you so much, Sayf, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
It's been an honor to speak to you for 40 minutes now.
Oh, it's very fast.
So okay, that's all for this week. Join us for another episode on Audio Plus, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Thank you.